And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne.
Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan. The Targaryens, like the dragons they control, are intense. They're passionate and prone to either brutality or fearfulness. But why are they so intense? Is it simply their nature, or is something else at play? We're going to break down the Targaryen traits, their words, their crest, and why their ultimate downfall is their tradition of incest. After all, what did King Viserys say?
The only thing that could tear down the house of the dragon was itself.
And before I go any farther, guys, I want to show you these brand new Eric and Eric pointing meme shirts that we designed at our merch store, and we also have our Team Green and Team Black baseball tees. Guys, we love designing these shirts for you, and shopping our merch store helps us make more videos like this one. The links are below. Now, let's get into it. The most defining trait of House Targaryen is passion. Every Targaryen is ruled by it. Now, passion can occasionally be a good thing. It can make inspiring leaders, as we see with Daenerys in Game of Thrones. But it also means that the Targaryens are ruled by their hearts and not their heads. They are victims to their own desires and wants. The most obvious example is Daemon. He always does whatever he desires. House of the Dragon talks a lot about duty.
Even I do not exist above tradition and duty, Rhaenyra!
Daemon is the prime example of ignoring his duty to follow what his heart desires. For example, he's married to Rhea Royce, a marriage that he is openly unhappy about.
I think my bronze bitch is happier for my absence.
For the royal family, marriage is primarily about political alliances and producing heirs. That way, the Targaryens have backups for the Iron Throne. Daemon never even attempts to produce an heir with Rhea.
Or have you at last come to consummate our marriage?
And he eventually kills her just so he has a shot at Rhaenyra. Not only is it brutal, but it's also not a great political decision. Daemon inherits Runestone, but it puts a deep strain on the Targaryens' relationship with the Royces. My guess is that House Royce is going to end up being Team Green.
I am making an accusation.
He also takes multiple wives, which is a sin under both the old and new gods of Westeros. Early in season 1, he marries Mysaria and takes her to Dragonstone. Not only is this illegal, but it makes the Targaryens look weak.
The king's own brother has been allowed to seize Dragonstone and fortify it with an army of his gold cloaks.
But Daemon rarely cares about how his actions may affect his house as a whole. He's aware that the public's opinion matters.
Their wants are of no consequence.
They're of great consequence if you expect to rule them one day.
But never considers how other Westerosi houses view them. He thinks they can subdue the entire continent with their military power and their dragons.
Who gives a what some lord thinks? You are the dragon. Your word is truth and law.
So he shamelessly gives into his passions and desires, even if they hurt the Targaryen family. Though not quite as brazen as her uncle, Rhaenyra is also blinded by her passions. It's established in one of her very first scenes.
I want to fly with you on Dragonback, see the great wonders across the narrow sea and eat only cake.
That might seem like a childish comment, but it's something that she never outgrows. Like Daemon, Rhaenyra is very stubborn about marriage, even though it is, unfortunately, her duty.
That is because I do not wish to get married.
Now, I'm not saying it's fair that these great houses are forced into marriage out of duty instead of love, but it's what happens. Other houses, like the Hightowers, are willing to marry for alliances. Since both Rhaenyra and Daemon are completely against the idea of marriage, it puts the Targaryens at a disadvantage politically. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the brothel scene with Rhaenyra and Daemon, since Rhaenyra was still a teenager, and well, Daemon's definitely a groomer.
Trying to strike a chord, and it's probably A minor.
But I do want to talk about Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole. Now, I'm personally not a fan of Sir Criston Cole. I think he made his own decision to sleep with Rhaenyra and then hated her for his own actions. However, it was a stupid decision for Rhaenyra to seduce him, especially after her outing with Daemon. It was just too likely that somebody would notice.
Tea, princess. It will rid you of any unwanted consequences.
Now, at that moment, she was completely driven by her own passions and desires with no regard for consequences. And the consequences are pretty severe. This action ignites the hostility between Rhaenyra and Alicent. There's a direct line from Rhaenyra and Cole's sexual relationship to the Dance of the Dragons.
Wait, the dragons dance? Or ballroom, or tap, or hip-hop?
They don't really dance, Doug. It's what they called the Targaryen Civil War in the book Fire and Blood. If this was just a stupid teenage mistake, then I wouldn't mention it. I don't think that there are any of us who are at our smartest when we're 17 and hormonal. But this is a pattern that Rhaenyra continues in her marriage with Laenor. Now, I have no moral judgment on Rhaenyra's affair with Sir Harwin Strong. After all, she and Laenor had an agreement.
That we perform our duty to our fathers and to the realm, and when it's done, each of us dines as we see fit.
But having several children who look nothing like their father is objectively stupid. Now, I should mention a difference between the book and the show here. In the show, it's very lightly touched on that Rhaenys is part Baratheon.
You have Baratheon blood from your grandmother, Rhaenys.
But in the book, she actually has dark hair like the Baratheons instead of the light hair of the Targaryens. So it is less obvious that Viserys and Lucerys are bastards because, after all, they could have inherited the hair from their grandmother. But in the show, it's shockingly obvious that they are bastards. Even Alicent says that maybe one dark-haired child could be excused.
To have one child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult.
But to have 3, that's bold. Rhaenyra's affair with Harwin Strong isn't morally wrong, it's just dumb, especially given his proximity to the boys.
Weapons up, boy. Give your enemies no quarter.
Rhaenyra isn't stupid. She definitely knew that it didn't look good, but she let her passions lead her instead of her head.
What about Viserys? He was not led by his passions.
I disagree. Viserys isn't as overt, but he's definitely guided by his passions. His marriage to Alicent is a great example. Rhaenyra says,
If it was for advantage, you would have wed Lena Velaryon.
And he agrees.
That is true enough.
It was not a smart choice. It divided his family. The Velaryons and the Hightowers end up on opposite sides of the Dance of the Dragons. That could have never happened if Viserys led with his head instead of his heart. Also, the Targaryens and Hightowers could not be more different. We actually break it down in our Hightowers Explained video that we're very proud of. You should check it out. It's up right now. It was not smart to bring these two houses in such close contact. It was almost inevitable that these two houses would fight since their morals are so different. Viserys didn't consider the political ramifications of his marriage. He just followed his own passions, and honestly, he kind of caused the Dance of the Dragons in doing so. Again, passion, not an inherently bad trait. A passionate leader often inspires their subjects. We even see this with Daemon and his gold cloaks. They love him in part because he is passionate. But too much passion leads to stupid decisions. You cannot lead a kingdom based on your emotions and desires. There has to be tactical thinking.
And it's hard for a good man to be king.
The Targaryens are also notably brutal. Daemon is the most obvious example. I mean, he literally beats a messenger to death for announcing aid from the king. But it's not only him. We see it in Aemond when he almost kills his nephew. We see it in Aegon with his mistreatment of women. This is a common trait, not just among the current Targaryens, but historically. The Targaryen motto is fire and blood.
Oh, that's memorable.
That's really menacing, and it's derived from a battle quote by Rhaenys Targaryen.
Oh, like Laenor's mom?
No, that's actually Rhaenys Velaryon. The first Rhaenys Targaryen was one of the original conquerors of Westeros. She was Aegon's sister and his wife. They all use the same names, it's really confusing. Now, during their initial conquest, Rhaenys Targaryen went to Dorne to force the Martells to submit. When Princess Maria Martell refused, Rhaenys said, "We will come again, princess, and the next time we shall come with fire and blood."
Well, that's intense.
I know, that is a brutal thing to say, and Aegon the Conqueror is remembered fondly, but he was also a very violent and brutal conqueror. This man ended bloodlines. In Game of Thrones, Tywin actually tells the story of Harrenhal.
An attack from the air with dragon fire. Harren and all his sons roasted alive within these walls.
Yep, when Harren refused to bend the knee, Aegon just burned everybody. Sound familiar?
I offer you a choice. Bend the knee and join me, or refuse and die.
Also, that wasn't the only time he burned everyone alive. He did the same thing in the Field of Fire, the war that made the Tyrells the rulers of Highgarden, as well as several Dornish wars. So it's safe to say a lot of people perished directly from Aegon's fire. Brutality runs in the blood of the Targaryens. I almost wonder if there's some reason that trait is so intense. There's a quote about the Targaryens in Game of Thrones.
They say every time a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin and the world holds its breath.
Now, a lot of Targaryen traits are one extreme or the other, so a lot of the Targaryens are brutal, but there's also a lot of fearful and weak Targaryens. Viserys is the prime example of this. Later in his life, he laments that he was never tested.
There is a part of me wishes I'd been tested.
But he was. He was handed a great kingdom by King Jaehaerys, but he left Westeros so much worse off. In fact, he created a kingdom so unstable that a civil war erupted as soon as he died. How did he do it? He was a fearful and weak leader. He was terrified of people being angry with him.
But I am forever doomed to anger one person in the pleasing of another.
His teenage wife had more perspective on leading than he did.
Is it better for the realm if the crab feeder thrives or is vanquished?
He also could not control his brother. Oftentimes, his brother acted with impunity. Occasionally, he would face exile, but he always found his way back. He was willfully blind to his brother's schemes. It seems like he never even acknowledged that he killed his wife.
Lady Rhea was a fine woman and a good wife to my brother.
He refused to see his daughter as anything more than his little girl.
I want him to see me as more than his little girl.
But he also did not protect her from Daemon, especially when she was a teenager. There's always been a weird sexual tension between them, even when she was 15.
Now, You and I both own a small piece of our ancestry.
Now, I don't know if Viserys could have stopped them, but at least he could have done a little bit better of a job coming between them. Viserys exiles him, but the second Daemon returns, their uncomfortable relationship resumes. The brothel scene was not shocking given their dynamic throughout the show, and it seems like Viserys just turned a blind eye to it. They are not the only brothers in the Targaryen family to be polar opposites. Prior to House of the Dragon, there was a king known as Maegor the Cruel. We see him mentioned briefly here.
Daemon would be a second Maegor, or worse.
His brother, King Aenys, was his predecessor. They are described like this. King Aenys loved his wife, his children, and his people, and only wished to be loved in return. His brother, Maegor, taller, broader, and fearsomely strong, lived for war, tourneys, and battle. Sound familiar? The High Septon even said of King Aenys, how can he rule the Seven Kingdoms when he cannot even rule his own brother? That's basically the same thing that Corlys Velaryon said.
What reason does the crab feeder have to fear us? The king's own brother has been allowed to seize Dragonstone and fortify it with an army of his gold cloaks.
We even see a similar dynamic among the original conquerors of Westeros. Queen Visenya is described like this, as comfortable in ring mail as in silk, while her sister Rhaenys is described as all her sister was not, playful, curious, impulsive, given to flights of fancy. Now, I don't want to take away from Rhaenys. She did fight and she was a great dragon rider, but her and Visenya were, once again, complete opposites. Every house in Game of Thrones has exaggerated traits, but for the Targaryens, they're exaggerated to the absolute extremes. So, we have to wonder why they're so extreme. Surprise, surprise, it's the incest. Now, before we talk about incest for the Targaryens specifically, I want to give a little bit of in-world historical background. As far as we know, incest has always been looked down upon in Westeros. It is a sin against both the old gods and the new. But the Targaryens aren't from Westeros. They are from Valyria and Essos. Incest in Valyria was more common, especially among dragon riders. Fire and Blood says it had long been the custom amongst the dragon lords of Valyria to wed brother and sister to keep the bloodline pure. However, reading between the lines, it seems like Valyria was also geographically isolated prior to becoming an empire. In the world of ice and fire, the Valyrians are described as sheltered amidst the great volcanic mountains known as the 14 Flames. In regards to their unique features, it's also said populations in isolation can often show quite remarkable variations from what might be regarded as common. So I think that incest in Valyria was a result of a limited genetic pool that meant incest was necessary for survival, and they came up with this cultural justification for it later on.
Incest, baby.
When Aegon came to Westeros, the incest was kind of accepted by the people in the church. The High Septon anointed him king. More than anything, I think they had 3 dragons that wiped out entire militaries, and well, you can get away with a lot when that's the case. However, incest among the Targaryens became less acceptable with every passing generation. When the Conqueror's grandchildren married, the realm was mad. The Starry Sept condemned it, and the couple could barely travel Westeros because they were constantly jeered at. The incest problem remained until King Jaehaerys married his own sister Alysanne and struck up a deal with these septs. That deal was a rule called exceptionalism.
What's that?
Exceptionalism was a decision by the High Septon. He said that incest was bad unless you were a Targaryen. The Targaryens were just different. They were magical and rode dragons, so for them, incest was okay because Targaryens are closer to gods than men. But that's bad logic. It was never quite clear to what extent the Targaryens are magical. They can ride dragons and sometimes survive fire, but they're not invulnerable. They can still die from infection and in childbirth. In Fire and Blood, their magic is even questioned after a young princess died of illness. The book says it was unthinkable that a pureborn princess should die shivering as if she were a common child, and yet she had. Mayhaps the Targaryens were not so close to gods as they believed. Mayhaps in the end, they too were only men. And if the Targaryens aren't magical, the scientific problems with incest still apply to them.
Why are you talking about science in a fantasy TV show?
Well, just because there is magic doesn't mean that there's no science. We know genetics exist. I mean, look how angry everybody is over Viserys' hair. Viserys even has a whole genetic story.
I had a black mare once. Black like a raven.
Genetics are science, even if the people of Westeros wouldn't call it that. The National Center for Biotechnology says twin and family studies have showed that personality traits are moderately heritable and can predict various lifetime outcomes, including psychopathology. Well, if you keep marrying people within the same genetic personality disposition, that disposition will only get more intense. This is why the Targaryens are so extreme. They have compounded their genetics to an absolutely insane degree. Now, even when genetic diversity is added to their family, family, it cannot outweigh the centuries of inbreeding that took place. Aegon and Aemon share some extreme Targaryen traits, even though their mother is a Hightower. The Targaryens are doomed to be unbalanced, not by fate, but by science. And when you look at it through that lens, the Greens and the Blacks aren't a tragedy. They're inevitable. The Targaryen line is full of extreme people, and since they are the ruling family, several of them vie for the throne. That's why this history keeps repeating. Visenya and Rhaenys, Maegor and Aenys, Viserys and Daemon, and Rhaenyra and Aegon. There's also another character from Game of Thrones that proves that incest is the problem, and that is Joffrey Baratheon.
Wait, how is a Baratheon important to the Targaryens?
Well, Joffrey Baratheon was one of the cruelest characters in all of Game of Thrones. Everybody hated him. He was a terrible, sadistic king.
After I raise my armies and kill your traitor brother, I'm going to give you his head as well.
But of course, Joffrey wasn't really a Baratheon at all. He was actually from the incestuous relationship of Cersei and Jaime Lannister. And guess what else? He has an extremely weak-willed and fearful younger brother, Tommen, who's also born of incest. Doesn't that sound familiar? Joffrey and Tommen prove that the problem isn't the Targaryens themselves. It's the incest. They aren't cursed by the gods to be crazy. They're just really, really inbred. Even the Targaryen house crest subtly represents their own downfall. The three-headed dragon represents Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. Well, Aegon and Visenya's child was Maegor, and Aegon and Rhaenys' child was Aenys. Maegor also caused a civil war when he took Aenys' crown. In Season 2, both Rhaenyra and Aegon will fly the Targaryen crest. Unlike their tradition with the Targaryen names, their flags are different, thank God. But they both feature the crest. This crest, which represents the incestuous relationship of three siblings, will fly throughout the fighting between this family. The Targaryens are a family of extremes. They are ruled by their passions and have a tendency for brutality and fearfulness, but their downfall is their incest, which takes all of these traits and exaggerates them. Now, because of their incest, it's almost impossible to have a truly stable Targaryen, which makes their infighting inevitable. And we'll see this firsthand in Season 2. So, what did you guys think? Do you think there's another reason for the infighting? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And big shout out to the writer of this video, Brianna McLarty. You can find her links below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.